You know, regarding the borders of 2022, I think no one counts on them anymore. Because counting on returning to these borders would be political blindness and a complete misunderstanding of what's happening. Russia is defending its legitimate interests. The legitimate interests of people whom the Nazis in Kiev, after seizing power through a coup, declared to be terrorists, monsters, creatures whose children, according to Poroshenko, they threatened to make rot in basements, while the children of the Ukrainian elite would drive beautiful cars, go to school, and eat candies. We need to forget about that. Do you know what I want to tell you? All these talks about going back to the borders of some years, they've been going on for a long time. And all these talks are linked to the fact that the Ukrainian leaders who came to power after February 2014 illegitimately, constantly lied and disrupted all the agreements that were reached over these years. If in February 2014, the signed agreement between the president and the opposition, guaranteed by Germany, France, and Poland, had been fulfilled, Ukraine would now be within the borders of 1991. There would not have been an uprising in Crimea, as they would not have refused to recognize an illegitimate authority, because such authority wouldn't have appeared. The subsequent war started when the Kyiv regime began bombing those who didn't recognize the illegitimate power, burning people in buildings, as happened in Odessa, where 50 people were burned alive, bombing Lugansk, artillery shelling all territories, which is categorically forbidden. Using the army in an internal conflict, you know, it's also a violation of international legal principles. A year later, there were the Minsk Agreements. If the Minsk Agreements, again guaranteed by Germany and France and endorsed by the Security Council, had been implemented by the top of the Kiev regime, Ukraine would have been within those same 1991 borders minus Crimea. Because a referendum was held in Crimea, no one disputes this. To be honest, even when we communicated in 2014, former U.S. State Secretary John Kerry told me, now it's no longer a secret, he said we should forget about Crimea, let's talk about Donbass. That was disrupted, and Ukraine just shrunk a bit more. And if the agreements that Ukraine itself proposed in April 2022 were implemented, and to which we agreed, Ukraine would also be within the borders of 1991, minus Crimea, and minus a larger part of Donbass. But Ukraine disrupted even this, refused to fulfill its own initiative. Therefore, there is no talk of the 2022 borders. We are talking about those borders enshrined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation.
If I could persuade you to answer a question in English, perhaps. President Trump has called Russia a paper tiger, has said that European countries should shoot down Russian planes if they violate European airspace. Do you see that as a provocation? And what would happen if Russian planes are shot down? Thank you, sir.
Well, firstly, we are in a UN building, and Russian is an official language here, alongside English. Therefore, I am very grateful to all of you for respecting our right and ability to use this language. Now, I may not be able to follow every statement, but I remember that a day after this term was used, paper tiger, the next day President Trump was asked if he still considers Russia a paper tiger, and he answered negatively. Therefore, if we respond to every rhetorical nuance, I've already answered the question about what I think about President Trump's statements. In public diplomacy, various tools, methods, and techniques are employed, and the same applies to claims that President Trump authorized bombing the Russian Federation, shooting down aircraft, drones. You see, if a drone isn't flying over our territory and crosses someone's border but exits our airspace, then perhaps anyone is entitled to do with that drone what they deem necessary for their security. But if attempts are made to shoot down any flying object or any object at all within our territory in our airspace, then I think people will seriously regret it if they embark on such a gross violation of our territorial integrity, our sovereignty. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, I think, said yesterday again that we are not yet at war, but no longer at peace. Militaristic rhetoric is growing by the day. His famous expression, which he has used more than once, is that he pushed through constitutional amendments to spend more on armament, developing military infrastructure, military potential. And his goal, as the Chancellor proudly announced, is to make Germany again the main military machine in Europe. When someone in a country that committed the crimes of Nazism, fascism, the Holocaust, genocide, talks about making Germany great again, probably a great military power, then surely he has an atrophied historical memory, and this is very, very dangerous. Many positions at the level of the Deputy Secretary General seem to be scattered across various continents, in countries located on different continents. But there are several positions on which the functioning of the UN Secretariat directly depends, as well as the decisions the UN Secretariat makes for approval by member states. You see, when the Secretariat recommends something, generally, there is a great temptation for member states to support it. Should not these key positions be distributed more equitably among the member states? It seems obvious to me. At the last session of the General Assembly, I spoke about the need for reforms in the principles on which the Secretariat's formation is based. Currently, the main principle is, taking into account how large the population is, the gross domestic product, the product per capita. That's roughly it. So basically, the bigger you are, the more place you get. Probably there's logic to this, but there is also the frequently mentioned principle of the sovereign equality of states, that in the Secretariat, people should be accepted for their work qualities above all, regardless of nationality, while ensuring a fair geographic representation.
If I could persuade you to answer a question in English, perhaps. President Trump has called you called Russia a paper tiger, has said that European countries should shoot down Russia. If I could persuade you to answer a question in English, perhaps. President Trump has called you called Russia a paper tiger. If I could persuade you to answer a question in English, perhaps. President Trump has called you called Russia a paper tiger, has said that European countries should shoot down Russia. If I could persuade you to answer a question in English, perhaps. President Trump has called you called Russia a paper tiger.